I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Hi, Ryan. You did a real wind-up on that one.
Because I'm super excited. We are recording. It's a beautiful day. You know, what more do you need?
Well, and it is baseball season, so it makes sense that you take a big wind-up, and then now we're just going to hit it out of the park. And
I don't get any of those metaphors.
This one is a double header because we are today doing a part 2 to one of our most popular podcasts ever, Famous Historic Houses of America.
Or American Historic Houses.
Yeah, it's another way to say it. It's a quicker way to say it. But, I like how in the Romance languages, there's no apostrophe S. They like to do that day. They add an of. That's what I like. Historic Houses of America instead of America's Historic Houses.
So if folks are listening and they haven't heard the first Historic Houses episode.
You got to go back.
Well, yeah, but you can finish this one. Because
you're not going to understand a lick of what we're saying if you haven't listened to the first one.
So folks can just go and listen to that. We're going to link to it in the show notes, so make it super easy for you.
Yeah, but Ryan, before we get into historic houses, I got a little news tidbit that I wanted to just pick your brain about.
Sure.
So there was this article in the New Yorker a few weeks ago. It was called "The Hidden Air Pollution in Our Homes." Did you happen to see the article, Ryan?
I did not know. The hidden air pollution in our homes.
That's right, and
that doesn't seem. Right.
This is one of those articles that the New Yorker likes to publish, where it's just trying to make you freak out about a thing that you, one of the few things in your life that you hadn't been freaking out about previously. Right. So they have a new one in a later issue. I've noticed that's all about how the sound of subway cars and passing traffic is destroying all of our inner ears.
Yeah, I just have super loud music on all the time.
So it's a real nightmare. That's very bad for you. Anyway, what this one is about how we all worry about smog and air pollution outside the home. But
do we?
Yeah, of course. If
people are sitting around actively worried about smog and air pollution outside their home. I mean,
when you're traveling to China or in India, a place
or
known
Mexico City these days,
or Mexico City, you got to be worried about those things. And but apparently we also have a lot of air pollution inside our homes, based on the activities that we do, like cleaning and using aerosol sprays, or even just simple cooking. It puts out organic material into the air, and it reacts, and it can be bad for us.
And this is why I always say that you shouldn't cook at home.
That's right.
It's dangerous.
Right. You like to avoid most chores of any sort.
Well, I keep my apartment totally free of all those things by never
doing anything.
Yeah.
By
never move.
Yeah, by constantly having takeout and going into the city.
But when I open the door, I wear a mask to protect me from the outside air.
Well, you might want to consider wearing a mask inside. But where this ties into travel, as we are a travel podcast, this seat taken.
We're not a home
I thought
air podcast.
I thought it would probably be just as popular. No, are you kidding? We just had our best download day ever.
It's true.
So I joke. I like to play the underdog, but truth be told, we are outlast another travel podcast left and right.
Yeah, and it's because of our fans who give us those 5 stars and those reviews that help us, reach new people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I found most interesting about this article was this one little sentence that jumped out at me, and I just earmarked it. I want to read to you here. It's about a chemical called squalene. Squalene. Yep. So it says squalene, a primary ingredient in skin oil, is extremely reactive with ozone. A fact that may explain why air travel, which exposes us to the higher air ozone concentrations of the upper atmosphere, often leaves us feeling dirty. And unquote. That's the end of the quote.
Right.
Now we're moving into our analysis. I have always found that after air travel, even if it's just like a 1-hour flight, I am desperate to go take a shower.
Really?
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you doing in that flight?
There's something about just sitting in that seat, and I mean, you and I are both sweaters. I think
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's ever seen you on a day over 40 degrees knows that you look like you swam there. And I there's something about sitting and just being jammed into that felt seat that
Right.
feels like everybody's oils have
Right.
just sunk into them.
This might be a WoW airline thing because Delta has nice
R.I.P.
clean air.
Hey,
Yeah.
R.I.P. Take
It's
a
coming
moment
back.
of silence.
It's coming back.
Absolutely, it's coming back better than ever. I find that I always feel kind of dirty, and I'm always mindful of like, okay, if I can avoid it, don't put your head back on the headrest.
What?
Because everybody's hair has been touching the back of that headrest. And anyway, I think this article might get down to an issue that scientists need to be studying. If anybody's looking, I would be happy to participate in a study about how squalene, which I have to think my skin oil produces at a higher level than
Right.
normal. Yours too. I'm looking at you right now. I see the squalene just glistening.
That's moisturizer. Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
moisturizer,
Yeah.
or is it moisturizer on a bed of squalene?
I don't understand how we evolved as humans to have this squalene in our bodies that reacts with ozone. Haven't we been around ozone since the beginning of dawn of
But
humanity?
you're saying that, but we didn't evolve to fly. Surely, if we evolved to fly,
Well, no, but you just said it's in our homes. So this is, it's
well,
even,
it is in our homes. But the point that you're missing the important clause,
Yeah.
which is that air travel exposes us to higher ozone concentrations
Right.
in the upper
Right.
atmosphere. So
That's true.
we're putting ourselves in upper ozone levels, and that's making the squalene go frickin' nuts. Which is why I feel like a filthy bag of shit when I'm out in an airplane.
I mean, I feel like the solution here is for more planes to have just beautiful showers that you can, while you're.
Listen, I would take an extra inch of leg space before a shower, okay? But it's true.
Have you ever showered in an airport?
No, I've never had that. Have you?
I have, absolutely. Yeah.
When?
But in a lot of lounges, they have showers. You go and you can sign up and you can take a shower.
See, the only lounges I get to go in are the priority pass lounges, which are like a second class of lounge.
Yeah.
And like, I appreciate a free Sam Adams as much as the next guy, but a shower would do me better. Like, I would give up it all to have shower access.
I remember on my great 40-hour airport journey to Brazil where I was rejected. I took a shower in Panama City. It was like the best day of my life.
Was that actually to Brazil? Because I think to say it was to Brazil suggests that you got out of the airport. And that
No. I mean, I flew to Brazil, and then I flew from Brazil to Panama City, and from Panama City to Mexico City. So if you're keeping track at home, it was London, Rome, Brazil, Panama City, Mexico City.
This is still one of those stories that we've never told the full version on the podcast because it's so good that we just tease it. So we're going to continue to tease it today. But I do want to ask, haven't you noticed on these flights, sometimes you'll get on a flight, and we've both talked about how you're always kind of keeping an eye out for, somebody who catches your fancy on a flight. And haven't you noticed that after like 2 hours on the plane, that person, their hair starts to look a little frizzier, their faces start looking a bit oily.
The squalene there.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is all down to the squalene. Suddenly it makes sense why everybody starts looking horrible 2 hours into a flight. It's the ozone squalene reaction.
I challenge you to find a way that people travel that doesn't make them look horrible. Like, do you think people look better after they've been on a bus for 2 hours? Or, I just think that the nature of travel is
I think being on a bus makes everybody look horrible. I don't know what, they must be pumping extra ozone into those buses or something. But yeah, no, it looks horrible. Check out this article, New Yorker, The Hidden Air Pollution in Our Homes by Nicola Twilley. And you're gonna learn more about dangers that live in your cabinets and in your sink, but mostly on planes and why you feel disgusting.
All right. Well, next time I'm on a plane, I'm going to make sure I have handy wipes with me to, because I'm going to feel incredibly dirty thanks to this article you brought up.
Absolutely. It's like anti-squalene wipes.
Anti-squalene. I think it's time to tell the cabin crew, let's take off.
Yeah, we got to get to those historic houses. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff. Oh, wait, that's what the thing says.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, so Kieran, I know you have like a lot of rules.
I mean,
what are your rules about
love
houses?
a rule.
Yeah, what are your historic houses in America rules, just to catch people up?
Yeah, so if you haven't gone back and reminded yourself, downloaded a second time the first version of this, Ryan and I had just kind of two quick ground rules for what we considered for historic houses here, which was to say we didn't want to talk about like castles and palaces. We're not going like Taj Mahal. We're talking about
Not in America, the Taj Mahal, FYI. Just wouldn't be relevant, even if it was.
Well, there will eventually be an episode, Historic Houses Overseas. And in fact, we considered that for today's episode. But we thought this version 2, we have a bunch of hardcore American listeners, even though it is interesting to see where some of these downloads are coming in.
Yeah, we have a huge fan base here in the United States. So thank you. We appreciate you.
Absolutely, giant. But I do want to give a shout out. We've got some loyal listeners out there in Norway. They are downloaded every episode. And for you, I'm just going to throw out a quick Jeg er underlivs betanasa, which is the only thing I know how to say. And
yeah, I'm not going to correct your pronunciation there. That was some rough Norwegian.
No, it was absolutely perfect. I studied in high school next to these Norwegian listeners because I know who they are. All right. Well, Ryan, here are the 2 rules.
Okay.
The first is we're talking about homes, places that people lived, that their families were in. Yeah, sometimes there was an office there, but we're not talking about kind of grand palaces that were made to be tourist attractions.
So there were no moats.
Exactly.
If there's a moat, it's probably not a home.
Exactly. No moats and limited turrets. That's what we're considering a historic home. But then what makes a home worthy of making this list of recommended homes? And that comes to Schmidt's rule of historic home value, which is this. This is the test that gets you on this list. Because you and I, we've visited, I would say, probably 100 historic homes around the United States.
I live in a historic home, so I feel it. Yeah.
Well, that's just because you're old. But my rule is if I dropped you into this historic home, blindfolded, whipped the blindfold off, and said to you, with 5 minutes to explore this home, can you name who lived here? If it's a great historic home, the personality of that historic personage is going to be so relevant to the way that it's maintained and presented today that you're going to know exactly who lived there. You're going to have some insight into their personality, and that's what gets you on this very hard list.
This exclusive list.
It's hard. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a highly exclusive list. So we're going to cover 4 historic houses that we recommend you check out today, and we're going to touch on one that we could call it a must skip.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm gonna push you back on this.
All right. So the first, and I really fought to keep this on the list the first time, but I've been sitting on it ever since when Ryan said, no, we're not going to do that one. Is a home that I grew up going to on all the field trips growing up right outside New Haven. This is Mark Twain's house in Hartford, Connecticut.
Is there a more American home than Mark Twain's house?
No, absolutely not. It is. It's funny because I think everybody so associates Mark Twain with Mississippi River, with living in Missouri, that it's a surprise to them to realize that the home that he built from the ground up is actually in Hartford, Connecticut.
It's depressing. Yeah.
Well, it's not depressing.
Well, I mean, he wrote all these amazing stories that took place in like exciting places, and then you find out that he really lives in Connecticut.
Well, let me tell you where he wrote most of those great books that you're talking about. There in Hartford, Connecticut. In this house, he wrote Huckleberry Finn. He wrote Tom Sawyer. He wrote Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court.
That was his Connecticut shout out there.
That was his Connecticut shout out. I got to say, not my favorite one, if I'm being honest.
No one's favorite.
And I think a folk tale for the ages, The Prince and the Pauper, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's a classic.
And it was all done in this amazing house. It's a huge mansion. I mean, it looks like it's in a high Victorian style, is what they describe it. And I really loved this quote from Twain biographer Justin Kaplan, who described it as, quote, part steamboat, part medieval fortress, and part cuckoo clock. And that really grabs the personality of the house.
Is it a beautiful house? Because I had heard that he went broke at some point in his life. Like he kept investing in like the dumbest schemes imaginable.
You're exactly right about that. And you learn a lot about this by visiting the house. So a lot of the money that he was spending off the successes of these books was investing in this house. And so they moved in. He and his family built it and moved in 1874, just to place you in the time. And it is a beautiful house. It's got big gabled roofs. It's many different shades of red. It's made out of brick, but it's very interesting. There's sort of these diamond designs that the bricklayers created both on the walls of the house and also on the roof tiles. And as you walk through, you feel like you're walking through pieces of his personality. Probably the most iconic room is this pool table room that's up in this kind of slanted ceiling, roofed area that has a pool table and his writing desk. And it was also kind of the cigar room. I feel like when you picture Mark Twain, you also think of that giant stogie in between his lips.
Sure.
And
he smoked in the house?
So apparently this room would fill up with as much cigar smoke as Mark Twain and his guests could possibly fit into it before throwing open the sash and getting some fresh air in there.
You know, this really plays into that article that you shared earlier because, like, there was a lot of indoor pollution in that house.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. I bet you can still smell it when you go in there.
It's also one of the cooler rooms is this library that leads into a greenhouse. It's this little area that is completely glass. It has this bubbling little brook and a beautiful garden that surrounds it. So it's a little place of kind of peace and quiet in this house. But to your point, you are right that Twain made some bad investment decisions. And the one that, despite the fact that he was this famous author, that he did very well in his books, he invested in what is called the page compositor typesetting machine.
That sounds like a hit.
So what it was is, you know how when you think of printing presses from this time, humans had to go and put in all the individual letters on those little plates, those metal plates.
That's not how we do it still?
No. Yeah, most web pages are preloaded on metal plates that are then pressed against the screen.
If only it was that hard to print things these days, probably better things printed.
For our level of IT expertise, you might as well actually believe that. And Twain truly believed in the page compositor typesetting machine and invested a good amount of his fortune, thought that he thought this was going to be the Facebook of the day.
Right.
And one thing that I think maybe should have set off an alarm bell was this machine is an enormous apparatus with 18,000 moving parts, okay?
I mean, look, we talked about last week about Apollo 11. That had at least 18,000 moving parts. So that itself does not disqualify the idea.
Fair point. But the page compositor was extremely prone to breaking. And the replacement parts and just trying to identify in 18,000 areas actually goes back to our single point of failure discussion as well. I mean, all of these things coming full circle here on Out of Office.
You know, it would have been better if he had just convinced people that it was fun to do typesetting. He'd be like, look how much fun I'm having doing typesetting. And then people are like, I want to do typesetting too. And he could have invented just sort of a typesetting factory where people went for pleasure.
That's true. He really should have taken his own advice from Tom Sawyer. It's very good. I like that a lot. And anyway, he lost a fortune on the page compositor typesetting machine.
We're not using those these days. It didn't take off.
And this house was so large and required so much to keep up. And Hartford was actually quite an expensive city at the time.
Right.
Now it's just the insurance capital of the world. You can get an apartment for a dime.
Yeah.
He needed money, and so he and his family actually decamped. Again, they moved in there 1874. They moved out to Europe in 1891, and at that time, Europe was much more affordable. And he was such a famous American, he could go around, do lectures, and start to store away some cash.
I mean, if Mark Twain can't figure out how to make a few bucks, what hope does that give any of us?
Yeah, really? Absolutely. Anyway, the Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut, if you ever find yourself there, or maybe you're commuting between Boston and New York, this is a great place to stop. You can do a quick hour tour. And they actually have one of the few remaining page compositor typesetting machines in existence still there. So you can see all 18,000 parts that really nearly did in this great author.
Well, I look forward to. I hear it's really fun to play with. So I was actually just in Detroit a couple weeks ago, and love going to Detroit. Great place.
Absolutely,
and Motown, exactly. Well, I did a very appropriate thing. I actually went to Hitsville, USA, Berry Gordy's house. That he started the Motown label at, and you can actually go. They've turned it into basically a Motown museum.
So Berry Gordy is sort of he's like the father of Motown, right?
He is like the father of Motown, exactly. Yeah. So what happened was he had gotten back from the Korean War, and he had started a business with his brother that flopped. He started a record store, actually.
Was it a typecaster, the Page Compositor typesetting machine?
He was like Records of the Future. Started this record store.
Pretty good idea.
Yeah, it was a good idea.
That's like our heavy investment in compact discs. I'm still holding out hope.
They're coming back. Technology is cyclical. So he gets back from the Korean War. He starts this record store with his brother. Total flop. He's broke. And he does what everybody did in Detroit in those days. He went and got a job at Ford, right?
Absolutely.
And he's working at
Ford.
Great
American company.
He's working at Ford, and he sees this assembly line. He's like, oh, wow. Like, this is a really great idea. What if you could do this for musicians? What if you basically had a place, a musician could come in, just a raw, talented person could walk through the door, and we could put them through an assembly line and turn them into a superstar.
Sure, yeah.
And
that's sort of how you and I became so famous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happens is, because this time he's doing like songwriting on the side, and he writes his song, and he gets a check in the mail for $3. And Smokey Robinson says to him, his friend Smokey, of course, he says, "Gosh, if we're going to pay you this little, you might as well start your own record company."
Yeah.
Right. And he goes, "You know what? I will." And so he borrows $800 from his. I know, right?
Wow.
From his family, $800.
Oh, his family had $800.
Yeah, I know, right?
Awfully nice. I mean, $800 in that time, pretty significant.
It was a pretty significant.
Absolutely.
So his family, he got together. He convinced the family, give him $800. He's going to start this record company, and he buys this little house that was owned by a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
So it has this big open window in the front because the photographer used to display their prints there, right?
Mm.
So he turns this into basically ground zero for this new record company, Motown, and he calls it Hitsville, USA. And basically, once he buys that property, he opens up Motown Studio A, and it never closes for the next 10 years. It's open basically 24 hours a day. That he has having people come in and record all throughout the day and night. He invited people, whenever inspiration strikes you, just come on by Studio A and let's make some music.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is over the course of the next 7 years, he buys all these other houses basically in the neighborhood and turns each of the houses into a different thing. So one of them becomes sort of a finishing school for musicians where they can go and learn. He hired this woman who ran a legitimate like finishing school to teach.
Oh, an actual finishing school. You're not talking metaphorically.
No.
School.
She was a professional finishing school. Founder.
A professional finisher.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she taught the Supremes how to meet the Queen and things like this. Right.
Wow.
So it's a really in the people.
So
who work there,
he was using it both to it was a factory line in that. It was not just a factory line for the music and the songs themselves, but also for the stardom. Like he would actually make stars of these folks by creating etiquette rules and
exactly.
Was there also like costumes, hair design, all that stuff was run kind of out of this brain, this square one.
PR, costumes, dance, everything was taught from these handful of houses for a good decade before Motown became so big that he had to obviously buy. They bought a big. Downtown Detroit building, and then they also had the Los Angeles operation. So when you visit the house, you get a chance to see the studio. But what's interesting is he actually lived upstairs with his second wife and their child. So while all these folks like Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Smokey Robinson, the Supremes, while they're all downstairs recording, his wife and kid are upstairs like hanging out in their apartment.
What I think is so interesting is that when you describe the approach of like how can we make music into a factory setting, it sounds like it will be soulless and that they will be uncreative, just churning out crap. And in fact, this is iconic music. I mean, who are some of the stars that came out of it? You mentioned the Supremes.
Yeah, Smokey Robinson, the Jackson 5, obviously Diana Ross. The Temptations.
Wow.
It's a really incredible amount of music that was produced, really all came from this little sort of blue house in Detroit.
And high quality, beloved American music. I mean, this is iconic stuff, but it came from this system that he put together.
Yeah, international too. I mean, one of the cool things you see in the museum is all these posters from when they toured Europe and Asia, and you got to imagine in the 1960s, the Temptations, headlining in Tokyo. I mean, it's a totally strange scenario.
So, Ryan, is the studio itself still there? Or did the house kind of, was it saved as a landmark straight when they moved out into this into a corporate building?
Yeah. So what happened is in the 1980s, Berry Gordy's sister was actually, she was a VP at the studio at the time, and what she noticed was people would come and were constantly coming and getting their picture taken in front of the house, and the house had no longer been used really for the record company. The record company had grown really large and was global at that point. But she basically called Berry up and said, "Look, you need, we've made all this music history here, and we should preserve this house." And so she led the efforts to turn it into a museum. So two of the 7 houses that he ended up owning on that block have been converted into this museum, and you can still go into Studio A, which is sort of where.
Oh my gosh! Really?
Yeah, you where the tour ends. You walk into Studio A, and it's pretty incredible because there's all these pictures around of the Temptations and of Diana Ross and just all these fantastic iconic.
How big is it?
It's small.
Yeah.
I mean, there were 20 of us on the tour, and we were smushed into it.
And did you sing a little ditty?
They actually have a sing at the end. They say Berry said that no one should come into Studio A without singing, and so the whole whole crowd sang a bit of My Girl. And let me tell
that's cute.
It was cute. We weren't very good.
I've heard you sing.
But what's cool is they have these photographs up of all these stars in the room. And the guide points out, this is the exact microphone that Smokey Robinson's singing there, or you're standing in the footsteps of the Temptations when they recorded the song. And so it does feel like, it feels like you're in a really special place.
That's really cool. I always admire the stories of the folks who recognize the historical value of these places too before they're converted to something else or torn down. Like, I hope that some of the listeners out there are considering our Out of Office podcast recording studios. I mean, these are historic landmarks that we're going to have to preserve.
I live in a historic home. I mean,
people it's because of the podcast.
Right. People talk about Motown Studio A in the way that they're going to talk about the Out of Office, my kitchen table here.
Actually, absolutely. Maybe just like our quest for a tagline, we need to come up with sort of that Studio A iconic name for these podcast studios.
So wait, let me tell you one more quick Motown story because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
So when musicians come to Detroit, many of them will schedule a tour to come see the Motown studios.
Of course.
And the guy told this story about 10 years ago. A certain gentleman was in town and came into the Motown studios and asked if he could play the piano there, which is the piano that's been there for 50 years. And they go, sure, you can play. So he sits down and he starts playing. And he's like, you know what? This doesn't it doesn't sound great. It hasn't been kept up with. So he wrote a check that very day to totally restore the piano back to its former glory. And that man was Paul McCartney.
Wow. And were they unaware of that when he walked in?
No, they knew.
It was only 10 years ago. I do think
they're like, who are you, sir? Why do you want to? Yeah.
I do think that a lot of these historic homes come with stories that sometimes seem a little specious, like the fact that he was carrying a checkbook. That doesn't ring true.
He's an old man. I'm sure he carries a checkbook. Yeah. Or his assistant has a checkbook with him.
Yeah, absolutely. A young man at heart. His is a historic home I would love to visit sometime.
I'm sure he's still there though.
Well, that's very cool. And so again, that is in Detroit. Is it in like the downtown Detroit area? Yeah,
it's in pretty close to Detroit proper. Yeah.
Great.
It's a beautiful little block.
Well, Ryan, to take us back into further history, this one, I think you might be skeptical right at the start, but just stick with me, and you're gonna see why this one deserves a place on the list. So about a year ago, Catherine and I were driving from Boston to Rochester, New York, for a wedding.
Great drive, yeah.
Beautiful drive. And, we were trying to break up. It's maybe a 6-7 hour drive, a little road trip. We got a good audio book going. Sure. And one good habit that we have, a habit I would recommend to folks, is when you're driving along the American highways and you see a brown billboard. So most of the highways have like the highway signs are in green. If you see a brown, often that signifies that there's some sort of landmark. Sometimes that'll be a national park sign. But there's some tourist attraction to go see. And so we're driving along the highway, and we're probably about halfway through, and we're coming near a town called Auburn, New York. And I see a sign on the side of the highway that says William H. Seward House.
William Seward's house?
Exactly. What now? You lit up, so you must know who this is.
Well, I'm a Lincoln guy.
You love Lincoln. You've been fired from jobs so that you had time to go and look at Lincoln's house.
It was worth it. Yeah.
It was absolutely worth it, and that just shows your devotion to travel and the podcast. And people think that's a joke, but it's true. And William H. Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, famed Secretary of State. Actually, his home was in Auburn, New York. And what I could tell that Catherine immediately knew that I like lit up as I was driving past. And I said, "Did you see that? Did you see that sign? Did you know that William Seward's house is here? I didn't know it was here." And so on the way back from the wedding, we made time and we stopped in to William H. Seward's house. And it's a pretty unassuming house, very large, very beautiful. It was built by his father-in-law in 1816, and actually blood relatives of his lived in it all the way up to 1951. So this really had some longevity in the family, well over 100 years. So the tour starts off, not going to lie, it was a little slow, but I was extremely impressed by the Lincoln knowledge of the tour guide. We had one of these tour guides that he knew absolutely everything there was to know about Seward and Lincoln. I was asking him some real stumpers, and he was hitting them out of the park every time, just trying to keep that baseball metaphor going. And when we moved from the first floor into the second floor, that's when it really became a very special house, and why it fit that if I dropped you in blindfold, lifted it off, would you know whose house this was? And it's because William H. Seward had a very odd habit, which is that when he would correspond with famed folks all around the world, especially in his Secretary of State years, or even when he would meet people one-off, he would ask if he could commission a portrait of them, or if they had a painting or a drawing of themselves that he might take home. And I'm thinking of this as almost that like social media instinct. I mean, this is why Facebook's so amazing. LinkedIn is so popular. It's because we all like to keep this log of people that we've had contact with, that we'd like to reach out to before. And so over the years, he collected hundreds of portraits of people, some who he knew very well and some who he met one time. And he papered the upstairs of his house in these portraits. And I'll post a picture of it on the Instagram at OOO Podcast. And so floor to ceiling is just portraits on every side. And it feels like you're walking in to William H. Seward's memory banks.
So, one of the things I love about Seward is that when he ran, he ran for president against Lincoln. And he was so confident that he was going to win the nomination for the Republican Party that he had all these fireworks ready to shoot up from his house. And this story is told in Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals, which is why I know it.
Hell of a rival.
Yeah, hell of a rival. So, basically he's all prepared to shoot these fireworks off, probably in the very house that you visited. And he gets word that Lincoln has taken the nomination from him and, doesn't get to shoot those fireworks off.
I hope he didn't mumble, God, I hope somebody kills that guy.
No, he ended up, he thought Lincoln was a buffoon that wasn't worthy of the presidency. And then by the end, he thought he was.
Actually, that has a very interesting parallel with the Obama-Hillary, where one loses, but then kind of rises above the defeat to become an extraordinary Secretary of State.
Exactly. I mean, Obama was a huge fan of Team of Rivals, and I think that when he appointed Hillary Secretary of State, he was definitely thinking of this relationship. Yeah.
So the other piece of the house that really stands out in memory is that what is William H. Seward most famous for?
The Alaska Purchase?
Absolutely, which they all called Seward's Folly.
Right.
At that time, Though apparently history has kind of blown that out of proportion. Some folks did realize what a special get that was. But he then went on after the purchase to collect artwork and artifacts from Native Alaskans. And so they have one room set aside where you learn all about the history of Alaska and how Seward came to make that purchase on behalf of the United States. And you can sort of get a look into the Native American cultures that existed at that time. And so, in the middle of upstate New York is this little room with special Alaskan artifacts. Well worth the trip, and I happened to see it on a hot day, and boy, it was just it was a fantastic transport of my mind to cooler climes and a cool-headed man, William H. Seward.
Is that how you know that it's his house? If you were blindfolded and dropped in it, you dropped in a room with all this Alaska stuff, and you see a picture of Lincoln with like a big cross through it.
Brutal. I would say that combined with the portraits, you would piece together. I actually, I was very, I could tell I really impressed my wife when one portrait that he had. I'm trying to think timeline wise how this worked. Yeah, it would have worked. One portrait that was hanging in the house. I said to my wife under my breath, I said, that looks a lot like John Quincy Adams. And she said, "You're such a nerd." And I said to the tour guide, "Hey, excuse me, is that John Quincy Adams?" He said, "Yes, sir, that is John Quincy Adams." And I felt pretty good about myself.
And folks who are in New York, if you go to Madison Square Park, there's a fantastic statue of Seward there that you can check out.
In New York City.
Yeah, in New York City.
Yeah. So absolutely, make your way to William H. Seward's house. Definitely checks the box, and I feel like it's very off the beaten path because this is not sort of a tourist town.
So, totally changing direction from the Secretary of State's house to a house that I have visited in Los Angeles. And this house is...
So I assume this one's going to be, we've been talking real historic icons. So this is probably going to be a president's house. It's going to be some great author. We've been keeping it super highbrow.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the house that Michael Myers was born in. Michael Myers, of course, being the
SNL star.
No, the fictional
Austin Powers
character from the Halloween film.
I love Austin Powers.
Nope, not Austin. This is not Austin Powers related.
He's so funny. I like Austin Powers. He's always saying "baby," Yeah. So this is Michael Myers' house.
So this Michael Myers not super verbal. I don't actually know that he ever speaks in the films.
So it's I married an axe murderer. That guy.
Similar, yeah. The guy with the white mask. I believe it's like a Nixon mask. It's actually painted white.
So I will say I've actually never seen the Halloween movie. So you're going to have to
really Halloween movies.
I'm not a horror movie guy, so you're going to have to really explain to me who this person is because I really don't know.
Well, there's one of the most famous American horror films is a film called Halloween. So the Halloween film was actually shot in Los Angeles, but in theory takes place in Illinois.
Sure.
But LA is a very strange town, so you can kind of find a little bit of everything in LA. So John Carpenter, who directed the film, found this street that sort of looked like any town, USA. And he shot this sort of iconic scene where Michael Myers murders his sister. And this house is actually an historic house. It was built in 1888, and it's known as the Century House because it's actually a great example of sort of that style of Los Angeles architecture in that time. But what's really interesting is it was almost demolished to make room for an apartment complex, and someone in the city council recognized that this was like an important house. I mean, this is an iconic American horror house. So they actually...
You're really stretching this historic houses theme to the episode.
Not at all.
All right.
And so what, they recognize in Los Angeles this is a super important house. So what they do is they actually move it down the road.
Oh, wow.
They pick the house up and they move it down the road and they sit it down by some train tracks where it actually sits today and is home to exciting things like an accounting office and an insurance broker.
In the house?
That's currently who's in the house. And if you go up to the house to see it, you can't tour the house, and you'll see a sign, please do not disturb the businesses just because this is Michael Myers' house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there's an iconic moment in the film where Jamie Lee Curtis, in one of her early film roles, runs across the street to a second house, and that's actually shot on that street, and you can see both those houses, although the second house has had some renovations done since then. But Michael Myers' house looks pretty much how it looked in the film. Got a fresh coat of paint, and you can get some good financial advice while you're there. So
yeah, this is an interesting class of historic houses that have been featured in cinema. I was actually, as I was researching the episode, the Home Alone house, the sort of big, iconic McAllister.
Yeah.
I don't know if it counts as a mansion, but it's a spacious home.
It's a McMansion for sure.
Yeah. Apparently, that house still stands. I hope that folks have the foresight like this to keep that piece of famous Americana. I think this could be a whole other episode. Great cinematic houses that you can spot. Now, this one, it's in South Pasadena in LA, right? That's like the neighborhood that if you're happening through.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's in South Pasadena. And we'll link to it in the show notes, but you can go see that, and it's actually not even that far from Freddy Krueger's house. So you can do a lot of horror houses in one. And you've seen Freddy Krueger. You're familiar?
No, I really don't see horror movies. I mean, I know of these things, but no, I don't sit down and watch them.
Well, the original Halloween is a masterpiece, and you should check it out. They get pretty bad pretty quickly, but
all right. So just the quick rundown of the four houses we recommend on today's episode. We got Mark Twain's house in Hartford, Connecticut, the Motown Museum right in Detroit. We've got the William H. Seward house in Auburn, New York, and wrapping up at the bottom here, Mike Myers, not that Mike Myers, Halloween house in South Pasadena. But Ryan, before we head off to the last stop, I did want to talk about one historic home that we've visited together. This was you were coming up to Boston. We had a rainy Saturday afternoon together, and we thought, what kind of history could we check out? I've seen most of the stuff around here.
Sure, there's a lot of history in Boston, believe it or not.
Absolutely. Sometime on the third part of this version, we're going to talk about the Adams house, where John Adams and John Quincy Adams lived. But for this one, you and I said,
the Adams family. That'd be a haunted.
Yeah, the Addams family. Thanks. And you and I went to Paul Revere's house.
We did. Wonderful example of a colonial house, I thought.
So Ryan's being very kind. I would say, I think we try to take a very positive tone on the show generally.
Yeah.
The Paul Revere house, it gets in only okay. I mean, you can see it in about 15 minutes. So for that, and to be able to say you went to the Paul Revere house, sure, maybe it's worth it. As Ryan says, it does evoke a certain period, but it really doesn't pass the test of if I dropped you in here blindfolded, took it off, could you say who lives here? There's no lanterns.
That's because you don't know anything about Paul Revere's. Who is Paul Revere? He's just like he's like a silversmith or something, right?
I've read Johnny Tremaine. I know a fair amount.
Right. So just because you don't get dropped in and there's not like a horse and a lantern there, does not mean that it is a pretty generic house.
It's a pretty generic early American house. It's also like, it does feel like it's kind of leaning. I remember the ceiling's pretty low. There's a lot of floors that are bending.
Well, I'm sorry he wasn't like governor of New York, or I'm sorry, he was just a guy who did what he could for the country, Kieran. I'm disappointed in this a bit.
All right, defend it.
No, I think that Paul Revere is a historic character, and of some importance, and he lived in a pretty run of the mill house like most people do, and I think it's nice that you can go and you can tour it, and you can get an idea about how folks lived back then who were not governors of New York or presidents of the United States or serial killers, like Michael Myers.
Now, one way that I do think that the Paul Revere house could be incorporated into a good Boston trip is if you not only went to the Paul Revere house, but you also went to the Longfellow house in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have in the Paul Revere house a small museum area that talks about, how Longfellow's The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere sort of made him into this icon of history. Right. And that is a very interesting historic house that could pair very well.
How many houses does Paul Revere need? Historic tours does Paul Revere need in Boston? Six of them or something?
So I think if you go to the Paul Revere house, maybe take a swing by the Old North Church. You could see that steeple where the lanterns were hung famously. and maybe apocryphally. And then head over to the Longfellow House. Now, that's an afternoon. That's a historic house tour that I could get behind.
Yeah. So you are saying that Paul Revere's house, in conjunction with 3 other houses, makes it worthwhile.
Well, a church and a house. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm doing. All right, Ryan. Well, I think it's time that we fulfilled another historic house. It feels like there's many more episodes to come in this series.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Based on the downloads, the people are hungry for it. So with that, I think it's time to head to the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
The last stop.
All right, Ryan. This is everybody's favorite segment. It's the people segment. Absolutely. Catch an online hashtag people segment. And this is the final segment of the show where you and I each talk about one thing that has fed the spirit of travel for us, even during the workaday week. It really captures that spirit of wanderlust that we celebrate each week here on Out of Office. So it could be something we read or ate or experienced. Could be something we smelt or visited. Could be
read and then ate.
Or read or then ate, or ate and then read about.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different verbs that could apply to it. But it all leads me to the question, what's my last? You usually go first, but I'm wresting control from now on. So I'm going to occasionally go first. Yeah. And I've got a really humdinger of a last stop right now. Right at the top, we were talking about some great journalism about air pollution in the New Yorker. I have another New Yorker last stop that I want to talk about.
You read the New Yorker.
Yeah, I do. I read the New Yorker.
Yeah. What did the London Review of Books say?
It's the April 29th issue. It's got a beautiful cover of Notre Dame. And if you don't know what's been going on with Notre Dame, you better go back to that episode, my friends. And it's their travel and food issue. And I have long loved this issue. I look forward to it all year round. You got to take joy in little things. I think I'm good at that. I got my bean club. I of course, got the pod every week. Every year, I really look forward to the travel issue from the New Yorker. And this one I thought was particularly great, packed with articles, super well researched, super fascinating for those of us who love to travel. Just to give you a quick snapshot, and then I want to talk a bit of a deep dive on one. They have an article all about the Northern Lights tourism, particularly interesting to me this year because I got to see the Northern Lights in Iceland. And it's about the experience of seeing the Northern Lights, how cameras and technology have changed the way that we interact with the Northern Lights, and also about setting your expectations. Because, of course, people can go for a week to areas where you want to see the Northern Lights, and you don't get to see them. And actually, I thought the article was really going to pay off with the journalist not seeing the Northern Lights, but I'll let you see what happens at the end yourself. There's a fun article about the Austrian Alps and dangerous ski racing that goes on there, and a sort of debaucherous party that happens every year. Not my sort of scene, more your sort of scene, Ryan.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. I think you got people in lederhoses and dirndls. You're gonna really like it.
I do love the Alps. There's no doubt.
But the one that really spoke to me, it was by Lauren Collins, great journalist there. It was all about tourism in Georgia, not the state Georgia. We're not going to Georgia right now. Georgia's on the Schmidt list, and it's about Georgia and how Georgia is opening itself up to tourism. And I've been seeing a trickle of articles and buzz around Georgian tourism. We're not talking about the state, of course. We're talking about the ex-Soviet Union. Georgia.
Georgian wine is blowing up on the scene as well. There's so much good Georgian wine out there.
You will learn about that in this article. And there's also a real focus on Georgian cuisine. And I was excited about that because, Ryan, you may recall, I opened your eyes to Georgian cuisine. A few years ago, we went to a wonderful Georgian restaurant in New York City. It's called Oda House, O-D-A House. And you can go down there, get your khachapuri. That's the...
Are you sure that was me?
I'm absolutely sure it was you. You were enjoying some Georgian wine, so I'm not so shocked that you don't remember. But yes, absolutely, it was you. And I highly recommend that place for if you're trying. If you read this article by Lauren Collins, you get that urge to go to Georgia. I wish I was heading there soon. I don't think it's on the calendar for any time in the next year, but you can get your fix at Oda House. So my last stop, pick up that New Yorker, April 29th. A lot of this content available for free on the website. And then there's one article that actually goes back to our last episode where we were talking about Gaudi's Barcelona. And unfortunately, this one is a little bit depressing about how Airbnb has changed the nature of housing in Barcelona. It talks about over-tourism, which is becoming a problem there, but it's also about how, working-class Barcelona residents are being driven out of certain neighborhoods because Airbnb buyers are taking them, are buying up investment properties and opening them up to these tourist groups. So, a really interesting thought piece about what is the right balance for a community? How do you not ruin a city that has so much interesting culture to explore like Barcelona? And, I think we've talked about this a lot. We're working on an over-tourism episode in the future because this is becoming a more and more common story. For what it's worth, I've also read a lot over the years about how Airbnb tries to play well with cities and tries to cooperate with local municipalities to make sure that the character of the city isn't ruined. So I'm not saying that it's a condemnation of Airbnb. It's about how it's such a knotty problem.
Yeah, I mean, and it's Airbnb is a symptom, right? Like if it wasn't Airbnb, there'd be 40 other home sharing sites out there. So, what's funny is my mother,
Sure,
hey,
Judy, avid listener,
friend of the show. Yeah, she she just put my childhood studio from my basically the efficiency apartment that I lived in as a teenager.
You had a separate apartment as a teenager?
Well, it's like attached to the house. You know,
oh my God!
Like
I understand where these libertine ways started so early. You got your own swingers of pad.
It was a bachelor pad. It was.
And today you're still a confirmed old bachelor.
I'm the Lindsey Graham of podcasting. So
that is what we call you.
So my mom just put it on Airbnb. So I've actually been going through the
hold
host
on.
process.
Are you passing this off as your last stop?
This is my last stop.
Oh my God! All right.
My last stop is that
all right. So it's something we smelt, read about, experienced, cooked, tasted, or something that your mom did. All right.
Well, I've helped her with this. I wrote some of the. I'm a good copywriter, so I wrote some of the copy.
Absolutely. I think you coined Ryan Davis the Lindsey Graham of podcasting.
The Lindsey Graham.
That's your line.
Yeah. And it's fun. It's sort of like a video game. When you're doing this Airbnb host, you get to go and set all the dates. You can make one day $500 and one day $100. You can just sort of, you've got so much power in the back of this platform. So it is really fun. And then you get, immediately you get all these emails from folks who are booking your place. So I've used Airbnb as a consumer. I prefer hotels, but if I'm staying in a place for a long enough time, Airbnb, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I never used it from the host perspective, and it's really fun actually. And there's just it's been kind of a blast to see all the people who are going to be staying in my old bedroom.
Oh boy, if they knew the things that had gone on in there.
My mom has my bedroom is all like Nirvana posters and Green Day posters. Now it's like paintings of the beach. I mean, she's really made it a little kitschy, mom.
Yeah, I love that. But it also shows the trend that we're talking about. I mean, everybody's getting on Airbnb these days.
But my mom did have to go to Ocean City, Maryland, downtown to the old city hall, and fill out a form and get that license to do the Airbnb. So you got to follow your local laws there.
It's the regulations that are growing up around it. It'll be a fascinating story to follow. I'd love to get someone from Airbnb on the show.
That would be fun. And look, in the show notes, going to link to the old the listing. So if you want to stay in West Ocean City, Maryland, and you want to get really feel like you're part of the podcast.
Historic home of podcast Lindsey Graham, Ryan Davis. Oh God, we'll have to get that plaque made up for above the bed.
Absolutely.
Now, Ryan, it turned out to be a great last stop. I'm sorry I was skeptical at the beginning.
Yeah. So, Kieran, what are we talking about next week?
Well, Ryan, I love a passport.
Oh,
and we've got a great episode way back in the catalog, early episode called Passports 101. I think it's time that we revisit passports because all we talked about on that one were the outsides of the passports. We didn't even get to the interior. So next time we are talking Passports 102. What is inside the passport?
Ooh, so join us next week to go inside your passport. Until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
I got to get some extra pages for my passport.
Do you actually?
No, I wish I did.
That's the dream. Me too. Unless you're just going for like day trips to France, you know? I mean, that can fill up a passport real quick.
They don't even stamp you anymore, do they?
I think they just burn you with a cigarette. Welcome to France.